Hello, my name is Matthew Galluzzo, and I am a criminal defense attorney here in New York City. I've been a criminal defense attorney for about 15 years. Most of my practice is in federal court here in New York City. Prior to being a defense attorney, I was a prosecutor in Manhattan. I was part of the sex crimes unit at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. So I have quite a lot of experience both prosecuting and defending cases involving allegations of sexual abuse. And today I want to talk a little bit about this indictment that just recently was unsealed against Sean Combs, otherwise known as Puffy or Puff Daddy or P. Diddy. And it's obviously getting a lot of attention in the press right now because he is such a well-known and famous media mogul, rapper, producer, etc., etc. And the allegations in this indictment are really quite explosive and I think shocking to the general public. And I just want to talk about these a little bit. I'm going to do another video in just a minute in which we talk about some of the bail arguments that were made so far and just sort of how those might have worked so you can better understand those. Let's first just take a look at the indictment. So this indictment was filed prior to the arrest of Mr. Combs, which means that prosecutors here in the Southern District of New York presented evidence to a federal grand jury probably in the months leading up to the arrest of Mr. Combs. And once the indictment was voted out by the grand jury, meaning that they found that there was sufficient evidence to charge him with some of these felony crimes, then a warrant was issued, and then Mr. Combs was arrested and brought to court. The indictment contains 3 counts, which are basically 3 separate crimes. They're all very similar and related. They each carry different mandatory minimums and maximum penalties, and they all have different elements, which means they all have different things that the prosecutor has to prove in order to find Mr. Combs ultimately guilty of these things. The first one is a racketeering conspiracy. It's also what we sometimes call RICO. Basically, that Mr. Combs was at the top of an enterprise or an organization, in this case what they're calling the Combs Enterprise, which is the basically combination of all of his corporate entities, Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, Combs Global. Putting these all together, they're calling it an enterprise that was regularly engaging in criminal behavior. And that would mean, of course, it's more than just one person. There's multiple people being involved, and that they engage in a pattern of criminal conduct. Now, this pattern of criminal conduct they're specifically alleged to have engaged in is basically the sex trafficking and forced labor of people to perform sexual acts for the enjoyment of Mr. Combs, basically. And this is a very serious allegation. Because there's an allegation that force or coercion was used to cause people to engage in sexual activities, it has a 15-year mandatory minimum sentence. And, I think that's going to be something the prosecutor is going to insist that he be convicted of. And so I think that means that we're probably going to have a trial in this case because 15 years is probably more than Mr. Combs wants to accept in a plea bargain. At his age, 54 years old, it's not likely he's going to accept a plea deal in this case, no matter what the evidence is. But getting back to the allegations, it's basically alleged that he used violence, that he used drugs, that he used coercion in the form of, pressure about people's careers, intimidation, in order to, even arson is listed as one of the tactics that was used to basically force mostly women to engage in these sexual performances that they're describing as freak-offs. And this supposedly happened starting in 2008 all the way up until 2024. So about 16 years of freak-offs were supposedly, organized by Mr. Combs and his enterprise. I think in short, women predominantly were recruited into these activities with promises of careers in media or in music. And then they were intimidated and forced into performing sexual activities, sometimes with other sex workers, sometimes with other people who've been recruited for the satisfaction of Mr. Combs. And then they were essentially intimidated in various ways to not talk about it or not disclose it to law enforcement. There is an allegation here that the enterprise, its members, including Mr. Combs and others, took significant steps to try to prevent some of these victims from ever talking to law enforcement. And that forms the basis of an obstruction of justice argument that the prosecutors later used at their bail argument. Now, the other crimes contained here is count 2 and count 3. It's sex trafficking by force. It's alleged to have been in relation to just one victim in particular, although the first count, this racketeering conspiracy, does describe a pattern of victimization over the course of 16 years. Count 2 relates to just one probably brave victim who has come forward to and will almost certainly be a witness at trial. And then count 3 is the transportation to engage in prostitution. That's essentially an allegation that Combs or his enterprise paid someone to move across state lines in order to engage in a commercial sex act. So these are all slightly different, but all somewhat related. There's allegations here in the indictment, which is publicly available now, that he possessed firearms in the course of these crimes. There's allegations that he possessed and distributed narcotics, actually specifies cocaine, oxycodone, MDMA or ecstasy, ketamine, GHB, among others, to some of the people that engage in these freak-offs, as they're alleged to be called. And, you know, it's hard to say what the outcome of this case is going to be. We probably won't even see a trial in 2026 because the discovery is allegedly just voluminous. It happened over 16 years. I'm sure there's a lot of investigation that went into this case. There's probably numerous cooperating witnesses in this case. There's numerous victims who are potentially going to testify at trial. And so I think a 2026 date for trial is quite possible. If he were to be convicted in this case, you know, it's really impossible to estimate what his sentencing would be right now, but I think something in the 25 to 35 year range would not be out of the question. And at his age, 54, that's basically almost a life sentence, perhaps. So I think there's going to be a trial. I think it's going to hinge very much on whether or not these purported victims and the freak-offs were actually coerced, or if they were just eager to please Mr. Combs because they thought that they had the possibility of advancing their careers or something to that effect. I assume that's going to be the argument in this case. But you know, there is some damaging video out there of Mr. Combs beating a woman in a hotel, and there's other violent acts that I think are going to be caught on camera, and that's going to be difficult evidence for Mr. Combs to overcome. But I'm going to be watching this case with a lot of curiosity to see how it goes. I'm sure you will too. And certainly I hope Mr. Combs gets a fair trial. But as it stands, unfortunately, he is currently incarcerated at MDC Brooklyn. I think that's a huge disadvantage for a defendant. We're going to talk about some of the arguments that went into his bail decision. And just watch the next video for that. Thank you. Bye-bye.